Welcome to Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco. I have pleasure of having two companions today. One is Rob Minkes, and another one is my regular companion, Marta Regalado. Welcome both. Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Thank you, Tijen.
And I will ask Marta to you in a second that where you're going to take us to, but I want to give a minute for Rob to introduce himself to our audience. Rob, what would you like our audience to know about you?
I'd like to share that I've been coaching for the past 3 years. I'm an ACC certified coach. I have a background in healthcare, working as a physician and as a leader, and as a passionate coach and consultant in leadership development, and have been working with an organization called Healthcare Experience Foundation, where we are passionate about ensuring a great experience for all who are involved in healthcare. And that leads us to the topic of today also.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for being here. And Marta, good to see you. Where are you going to take us today?
So today we are going to talk about diversity and inclusion. And to get us started, I have a question that's going to kind of take us right into, the heart of it. And it was a question that you proposed, Tijen. And as we, discuss these concepts of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, I'm curious, how does one become aware when their behavior might be producing in someone else, feelings of, exclusion or just feeling unwelcome?
So for me, it could be intentional or unintentional. For example, I was traveling in Europe, although that I selected vegetarian meal, informed the airline about it ahead of time. And when they were serving the food, they told me that they don't have vegetarian food and that's it. So, so that was their cost cutting or whatever that may be, but that was an intentional exclusion despite my request. And sometimes that we are actually unintended, but we are not aware. Here is another example that I was in a client services office for a well-known Fortune 100 sort of a financial institution to talk to the advisor. And I walked in there as a petite person. They had one chair, which was so high, and it had no adjustment levels that when I sat on it, my feet didn't touch the ground. So I was trying to talk to this advisor, feeling so uncomfortable. So that was unintentional. So it is an interesting concept, right? And sometimes we do want to be excluded, but we are forcefully included, thinking about being invited to a dinner at somebody's house. You don't want to eat one of the dishes, but they enforce that you eat it. And that's unwanted inclusion, right? And so it all requires awareness, especially when it is unintentional. And because the diversity, we welcome it in some ways. For example, for nature, I adore when there are microclimates as you walk in a path. And sometimes people feel threatened or their values are not in alignment in what is being presented, then there is also desire to get exclude someone or force them to comply with what is the norm. And it all is about awareness, along with feeling safe enough inside the self to welcome the diversity.
Thank you, Tijen. That was beautiful. And I loved, I felt like right from the beginning, we got to the heart of it, which is so, it's so you. I love it. And thank you for offering those examples. It's very helpful to, differentiate between the intentional versus the unintentional exclusion, really by having those examples that you shared. So thank you for that. And Rob, I'm curious what comes up for you.
A few things. And first, I love the question because you asked, how does one become aware? And that's like, indeed, how does one become aware? And that is at the heart of the matter. And when we start to talk, and I love that you led off with the idea of belonging, because it's the inclusion and belonging that are most important, because that is when we talk about diversity, however we're going to define it, is the diversity in action. And so just because you're at the table, you're sitting in first class, doesn't mean you're eating. And so I don't know if you've traveled first, but that there's an impact, and that's the awareness. So that starts the question of why we're here, why we have the discussions, and why this becomes important, and to take the opportunity as coaches and those who are working on our awareness to have the courage to begin to participate and share.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Martha?
Yes,
Especially, I'm thinking about you, right? You, as an Hispanic origin person, lived in the US, outside of US, and you were sharing some of your experiences, how it was for you when you went to Spain. And I'd love for you to share some of it here, as you feel appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, when I feel a sense of inclusion, let's say I travel to a different country and I feel a sense of inclusion when, people are curious and interested about where I'm from, when they show an appreciation for that, as opposed to, a lot of times people can be really indifferent, or, you can, there's some people, either indifferent or you can be discriminated against. But I feel like the opposite of that is really an appreciation for a different culture and an interest in it. For me, that makes kind of like the biggest difference, where I feel, a sense of, kind of inclusion and belonging because of that interest and appreciation. So that's my point of view.
Lovely. Thank you for that share.
Yeah, thank you for asking, Tijen. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what comes to mind. Both of you you both already touched on it, but when you hear the words diversity and inclusion and now belonging, what comes to mind?
Why don't we start with you, Rob?
Yeah. And I love that as establishing a foundation. And my approach has been to allow us to create foundational definitions without it turning into debates. And I think that really leads going from debate to discussion into dialogue, which is most important. And I like to think of it as simply as possible. And I have a colleague who says diversity is a fact. Look around, right? You can see who's there. You can see who's not there. And then the inclusion is the diversity in action, right? That's being at the table, but belonging is being able to eat and being able to share and to have that safe space and to be appreciated. How we go about that, right? The self-awareness, the open-mindedness, do we have the knowledge and the skills? Have we practiced? Are we able to do those things? I think that's at the crux of it, that even, goes beyond the definitions.
Beautiful. Thank you, Rob. So what I was thinking is in alignment with both what you shared, Martha, and what Rob is expressing here, that, and another word maybe is more appropriate. I was thinking about this before, that maybe the word we're looking for is not inclusion, but welcoming. Because inclusion also becomes forceful sometimes. We don't need to be including everybody at every time and everywhere, but welcoming, when somebody wants to be included, they're welcome. When somebody like me wanted to be excluded out of those fish head soup, I want to be excluded of that. So I think that sensitivity to appreciate and understand and recognize that there is a difference, and appreciating that difference and feeling safe enough to welcome that to exist. And that's what comes to my mind.
Yeah, thank you for making that difference between inclusion and welcoming. It feels vastly different. You can be included, but not feel welcome. And, without feeling welcome, it's almost like you don't want to be included in the first place.
Yes, absolutely. I remember one of the emails I received through my corporate career, sometimes that there were executives, high degree executives, assistants can make a mistake, and all of a sudden you're invited to a meeting where you were not supposed to be invited. So I remember receiving an email saying you are cordially uninvited.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what I love about welcoming is it takes us to a place where we can have agreement and we can have dialogue, right? How do we know someone feels welcome? What are we doing? What are we aware or not aware of? And those become perhaps easier conversations to have. I think we can get agreement on that. And what underlies that, it takes us to deeper levels of our values and what's important. So I love that idea of welcoming.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So I'm curious, what I have like a few, like so many things floating around in my mind. But I'm curious, what is important about this?
You want to go first, Laura?
I'm happy to go first. I'm happy for you to go first also.
Absolutely. Then importance is about collective living, communal living, right? If we think about, to me, obviously, this planet is a relational planet. Every experience we have, that we understand the self, understand the other through a relationship, even if it is a relating to ourselves. And you and I talked about in few of our episodes, Martha and Rob, and you both know that even in my mentor sessions, I often talk about multiplicity of the self and inclusion of the different parts of ourselves too. So the welcoming concept also comes there. Then the importance becomes to feeling okay about who we are and what we do and how do we want to relate. And that brings about more comfort for the authentic self-expression. And to me, that is one of the most important thing about human existence, right? If we came here to express the self, to understand the self, then the self-expression closer to its authenticity is going to give us the better experience. And this is very much related to that concept out of my view.
Mhm. Thank you, Tijen. It's like, we can only welcome others to the extent that we can welcome our whole selves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I love that as a foundation of its importance, because as human beings, collectively sharing our realities and experiences, feel connected on that level. As we become outwardly expressing beings limited by our neurobiology and experiences, it doesn't manifest always in that way. And then there are the unintended consequences. And having our discussions and our dialogue and participating becomes ever more important to help to understand for ourselves and for others, and start to build bridges.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, beautifully said. I was actually discussing this with one of the executives that have been coaching for a while. And some of our sessions were about that person's inclusion of some of the parts that they were not okay about having. So then let's say if somebody has a passionate warrior archetype inside, but they believe in very peaceful, quiet self-expression, or they've been trained on that, then the passionate warrior is going to be held captive. And as long as that's being held captive, then that person cannot even feel okay about being in the presence of another person expressing that part of themselves freely. So that gets to be, again, it is part of our self-awareness and recognition of the microclimates within, as Rob was saying, and the microclimates without.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it confirms how everything ends up being an inside job,
Mm-hmm.
so you work from, the inside out. Yeah.
You're muted, Rob.
Thanks so much. I love that, in that our first response whenever we're talking about what someone does, or let's say we're going to have a list of agreements to have these conversations, it's always about what the other does. The other does this, or acts of exclusion, subtle acts of exclusion, or if we want to call them microaggressions. It's what's been done to us. And the perspective is for us to grow and to make a difference is from that inside out approach. And that's new to a lot of people, and who are struggling with some of the things we're talking about, feeling the impact, whether it was intended or unintended, feeling those impact and beginning to have those conversations and those helping conversations. So I really appreciate what Tijen and what you brought up about that inside work job, Marta. That's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Rob. So I'm curious, what are the key elements of diversity and inclusion?
Go ahead, Rob.
So the key element is, and you said it in the beginning, Marta, is the curiosity, right? The curiosity of what's going on with ourselves, what's going on with others, and what's going on collectively, because we have a net result. In the key aspects, again, if it's going to begin with our own self-awareness, it goes to who's responsible. What can we possibly be responsible for?
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's pretty difficult to reach beyond ourselves. We hardly have accountability or responsibility for how we react. And it never a blame game, but we are, we all have our neurobiological wiring. It's called bias based on our environment. That's not intentional. It happens. Just like diversity, that's a fact. So as we begin to understand those things and make the decision, right, that we are going to grow our self-awareness, grow our open-mindedness, and we know that's going to be easier for some who might get it naturally or has done the work, and very difficult for others. Right. And so that's the beginning. That's the beginning to start to, understand, diversity is a fact, right? We've talked about that. We talk about, there's a difficulty with the debate in our society of what's right, what's wrong, right? It's suspending that judgment or recognizing when there is judgment or assumptions that others are making in ourselves. So the components are, breaking them down into our core ability to grow our self-awareness. What do we need to know or learn or unlearn? What skills do we need to be able to grow new perspectives and grow new awarenesses? And that's, the heart of growth as human beings, and being able to participate in our own and others' growths as coaches, whether it's individuals, teams, organizations, or participating in our community. So becoming equipped to do that, I think, is important.
Beautiful. Yeah, Rob brought forward our biases and neurobiology and responses, as well as the judgment. So then I'll continue on that path into the somatics of coaching and the somatics of self-awareness. I think that culturally, we are intending to solve that if something needs to be solved at the heart center, rather than we are intending to solve in the mind center. So then judgment, non-judgment, welcoming, appreciation, those are the qualities of the heart. So then one's ability to sit within their heart, to appreciate. And I often use the language of discriminate to appreciate, not discriminate to alienate, right? The intentionality of being able to appreciate the diversity, as you were saying in the beginning, Marta. I wanted to be recognized as a foreigner and to be welcomed being one. So the discriminate to appreciate, to discriminate to recognize, we need to use our faculties of self and the other. And then what we do with that discrimination gets us into welcoming and belonging inducing behaviors versus welcoming and alienating behaviors. So the key components then becomes our ability, to me, to sit in the heart And then even just to recognize self-awareness. What is happening to me when I recognize somebody expressing something outside of my anchored belief system? What's happening to me when I recognize somebody is doing something different than I would do? And then we can actually start the conversation from there, as Rob was presenting.
Yeah. So really using that as an anchor, that awareness that really kind of keeps you like very steady. And it's interesting, Tijen, how you were talking about like being able to, sitting in the heart and growing the qualities of the heart, such as, curiosity, appreciation. And Rob was talking about kind of like, the skills. There are skills that you can build, to grow like more awareness and more perspective. So it's interesting how there is, an approach that seems a little bit more tangible, maybe, where there are skills, I imagine, that you can learn. And another approach, where you're sitting in the heart that feels a little bit more intangible, possibly, and how these two can come together to really kind of like, grow, a person and really help for, others, for them to welcome themselves and for them to be able to welcome and appreciate others.
Yeah, I mean, I think Rob again talked about our neurology and neurobiology, and Resma Menakem also talks about this. And I've written a blog about whose fear is it anyway, right? There is the reactive response, but when was that reactive response produced originally? It may have been centuries old, and it's handed down into the generations. So one can learn. This is why I say that we're trying to solve the problem needs to be solved at the heart with our minds. We can learn certain things intellectually, but can they override our reactive response?
Yeah.
That's when it gets back into what Rob was talking about, unlearning. The pause and the recognition. Yeah.
Yeah, the recognition, the awareness, like you said, the pause. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's what we do with the pause. That's the next, because we all talk about the pause and we label things. And I don't even like to say I'm not of what happens, because we pin it on something happened that's outside of our control, when we can grow our capacities to become aware and to understand that what we carry is generational, right? And it's carried through our experiences. And we develop within that as infants. We begin to categorize and do something called essentialize. And out of that grows naturally, that's our first stereotypes. I visited my grandson over the holidays. He is maybe a year and 8 months. And it was cold out. It was in the Northeast. And he started pointing outside a sliding glass door, puppy, puppy. And it was the squirrel, right? So is essentialization and, categorization. All four-legged creatures are going to be puppies or dogs. We soon, by the age of 4 or 5, apply that to people and make over generalizations and don't necessarily unlearn that. And that creates some of the, stereotypes, and in its worst extent, discriminations, some of the things that we see that happen as a result of that. So once we understand and start normalizing the process, to your point, Tijen, that's the skill. So when I'm caught off guard and I think we're having a discussion and someone brings up a debate, and it's my natural response would be to get into debate mode. It's what I do with that pause, and not just recognize how I'm feeling, but then immediately recognize the other person, affirm their position and their share, it begins to create something entirely different for us. And I don't know you and your, as a master coach and with the somatic and neurologic type coaching, what's happening as we grow those responses with that.
I think that as yogic studies teaches us that the change occurs in between the breath. In between breath is the pause that, and this is what I teach on my somatics and neurologic teaching, that free will is often not free because it's conditioned, it's programmed, it's reactive. So recognition of the choice availability then gets us into whether we want to go to the heart, whether we want to go to the gut and punch somebody or do whatever we want to be doing. And yeah, that's what I would say, that the pause gets us into recognition of the moment and recognition of the reactive response, and then looking for possible other choices in that moment, if that's what we want. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting how, I can imagine, that the moment where you pause, where you feel like you want to react or you want to jump at something, pausing can be very, very difficult. But it's interesting, Tijen, how you were saying, there is freedom in that pause. And it's the freedom to choose how you want to, respond, as opposed to just, reacting. So it's interesting how that, the work, because it takes a lot of work to be able to pause and reflect and choose, ultimately gives you a sense of freedom. And I'm curious how this relates to coaching. How does coaching influence, diversity and inclusion? And I'm curious about your role as an MCC coach in this.
Coaching, the way I teach, way I coach, is all about self-awareness, self-awakening, deeper level recognition and inclusion. So that's, as a master coach, I teach in my teachings, I use that in my mentoring, and I use it in my coaching. As I was giving the example earlier, that the executive was saying, I want to use that same inclusion when I am relating to the people that I'm leading from different generations, because they act very differently. I want to welcome their positions as I did internally. So I think that's the role that I see. And then there is the social responsibility. As ICF actually speaks about their values quite clearly, and inviting others. Even this show is part of my social responsible offering. So those are the things coming to my mind. What are your thoughts, Rob?
Yeah, I love that. And, the past, since 2019 with the pandemic and, a lot of the social unrest and the political unrest brought many things to light that created a level of awareness for many of us. And what that means is that allows us to see some of our own gaps and our own blind spots, not looking outward, but looking inward. And for many of us who have had privileged lives in many respects, it's getting comfortable in having discussions. It's getting beyond any guilt or shame, and then having the courage to participate. And the reason, as a backdrop, the ICF had an international symposium that I participated in probably a little over a year ago, and had some breakout sessions that were, I was being myself, and bringing much of the coaching work that we do in the mentor sessions with Tijen. We coach at, in practice at a deeper level. There were tears and gratitude, and I was authentic, and I could openly talk about where my blind spots were and my gaps, and in a sharing experience, that it became so important that I began to participate. And in my work with Healthcare Experience Foundation, there was a growing need for healthcare organizations to want training. And from my perspective, we can train on anything and just give information, but taking that coaching approach to help grow that self-awareness, awareness of others, was a real opportunity to try to make a difference. And so the underpinnings of what we do as coaches, our own personal growth, our own personal experiences, and applying that to individuals, to teams, to groups, I find it's a powerful approach. And I think it's a novel approach. It's new to what's happening, and it creates dialogue. It is the curiosity, all the things that we would say coaching, in the skills that we develop, build inclusion, build belonging, build all of the components that lead to that. So that's what I would add on.
Thank you, Rob. And that was my next question. But before that, I'm curious, you've mentioned this word a few times, to participate. And I'm curious, when you say to participate, what does that look like?
So it can be different for different people. One is participating in conversations and dialogue, not just debate or telling. So if we're going to participate in a constructive and productive direction, to be seen and heard and to see and hear others, we need courage to do that. And we also need some knowledge and skills to do that. And so that is also another way that coaching helps. And as a coach, choose to participate and share with others. And it might not be for everyone. It might not land on everyone the same way, though it can make an impact and can make a difference. So what I'm starting to see there are people who of all different, so I now call them the dimensions of diversity. So if you think about the dimensions of diversity, our cultural experiences and our complex identities as a result, right? Just the shift from the term cultural competence. How could we ever really be competent in someone else's experience and culture? And so it requires cultural humility, right? We need to become a learner, right? Become curious, eliminate power differentials. So participating in that way, and sharing and having conversations, being willing to make mistakes without beating ourselves up or beating each other up. So that's what I mean in terms of participate. So we can participate as individuals and then have conversations with others and make a difference for other people. So I think that's the underpinning of participation for me.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And so it almost sounds like participating both formally and a little bit more informally, having these conversations. And
yes.
Yeah. And that's really interesting. Cultural humility. Yeah. What a beautiful term. I'd never heard it before. I love it. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious, what might be challenging for people around being, more inclusive, and how can coaching support this?
I think for me is getting out of our learned unconscious attachment to the victimhood. What are we getting out of that? Because that actually enables and disables at the same time, right? It enables the same behavior, the one that might be on the presentation of the discrimination, and also disables the one that is being presented in that state. So I think that if we're talking about dynamic, we need to look at each end of the spectrum, because tug of war to exist, it requires somebody to let go. And how do you let go when you're hurting? How do you let go when you're really suffering? That's a question we still need to figure out and answer. I am not suggesting one side or the other, but we all need to feel responsible of the positions that we're taking and the outcome of that positionality. What is that producing? And so collectively, then we can find a different way out.
Yeah. And would kind of victimhood be kind of on the other side of the spectrum to responsibility?
Absolutely right.
Okay.
Because if we put ourselves in that position, then we are looking for somebody else to rescue us.
Mhm.
How is that going to change our dynamic?
Yeah.
And what I love about that is that happens without us knowing. And that's the choice. The skill is the pause and the choice to not participate as, the victim or the rescuer or any other aspect that perpetuates what's not healthy about it. And going back to what you said earlier, Tijen, is not just the acceptance, but the appreciation that this as human beings may remain unresolved and continue to be a little uncomfortable for us, and we're not going to feel that sense of closure. And I know we talked about ambiguous loss, and this is perhaps one of those things that's going to be with us in that respect. And then what are our choices, and how we choose to interact, and how we choose to interact with those who are struggling in whatever role it might be.
Yeah, and recognition of how maybe our words or behavior bruising one another. So I think that recognition of that, how are we bruising one another and what's happening? And sometimes you both heard me say that people tell me when they say in my coaching sessions, oh, they are pushing my buttons. And I say, well, yes, and they are your buttons. Maybe they don't mean to push them, but they were squeezing by and they touched the button that is yours. So, right, let's own our buttons and decide what we're going to do with them. And then because the bruising is also our choice. And it is very hard to think about, as we have we're recording this in January 12, 2024, couple of conflict are going on in the world, and we call them war. In those impacts, right? How do we think about victimhood and non-victimhood and all that? These are very, very challenging concepts to figure out. But I think that more we sit in our hearts, and we will find a ways to shift the dynamics. That's what I'm thinking. I'm not saying this is easy. I just want to be inform our audience
Yeah.
about it. I'm just saying what I think.
That's
Maybe
beautiful, sitting in our hearts. And I love the owning our buttons.
Love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So as we bring, this episode to a close, is there anything that either of you would like to share on the topic before I ask you about your any upcoming events?
Yeah, I can start. I think the importance is having conversations in a way that we explore our language, how it relates to how we feel and our emotions, how it drives what we do. And it's not doing one thing, it's how we integrate it into what we do and in our choices of what we do and how we do it and how we participate. And I didn't mention at the beginning, one of my choices was I became a founding faculty at the Orlando College of Osteopathic Medicine as an opportunity to bring an additional perspective into the way that we educate and do things different than the way they've been done in a field of education for the past 200 years. So those become the choice. So how do we integrate this into what we do, that it becomes, part of us, and maybe, that's always open for discussion and conversation and dialogue, but it's that exploration and creating, I think you brought it up in the beginning, Marta, that safe space to where we can be curious, to where we can make mistakes, and we can wear our bruises, we can wear our scars, we can wear our biases, and agree to work on them. And so I think that it's exciting to think about that possibility and to take away the stress and the pressures that in the conflict that we're feeling around these discussions, that it can be pleasant, it can be joyful, and that's part of the human experience, even when it's difficult, to Tijen's point.
Thank you. That was beautiful, Rob.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And what are your thoughts, Martha, before I share mine?
I thought it was so interesting how Rob just said, like integrating this so it becomes part of it. It's not something that we practice out there or once in a while. It's something that, it becomes part of us. And so I really like that. And I am taking that away with me.
That's beautiful too. What I want to say is that maybe shifting our thoughts radically to get to a point of celebratory, taking these as a celebratory event when we see these conflicts towards to make the change. Because if the conflict, then it's the recognition. What do we do with that conflict is the next step. So then what did the conflict do to you? Not to blame the conflict, but to recognize the conflict. And what is the next availability of, and maybe first, as it's been for a few centuries, first response to our nervous system is not to celebrate the conflict. And then what is the next response? What is the next response? Because if we were capable of creating the conflict, I bet that we are capable of creating non-conflicting situations. Recognition of that. It's not either or, it's the end.
Yeah. Yeah, what a great point, Tijen. Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you to both of you for this wonderful, inspiring, beautiful conversation. And before we wrap up, I am wondering if either of you have any upcoming events that you would like to share with our audience.
Anything from you, Rob?
Yeah, I continue to participate in trainings with, you could go to healthcareexperiencefoundation.org or DEIfoundations.com for some of the courses that we teach. I'm on LinkedIn. Rob Minkes is a good way to get in touch or contact or have conversations. So I appreciate being here, Marta and Tijen, and it was a really wonderful dialogue.
Mm-hmm. It was lovely having you here, Rob, always in any um, events that we have. And for me, I have two listed on my website right now. One is the group mentor coaching. It's going to start in February. And if anybody is interested in that, I highly recommend signing up because I think I'm only going to be able to offer them once in a quarter this year. So it's gonna be a rare event. And then those are the group mentoring can be used towards group mentoring hours or continuing educations, as well as upgrading the credit or credentials or renewing the credentials with ICF or NBHWC. And then the energetic coach training that is coming up. And in that training that I've also included Reiki attunements as a vessel to increase the coach's sensitivities towards human energies, including their own bodies. And then we get into theories of how to apply energetic coaching theory and the practice. So that's a comprehensive training. And the first session is starting in January. So they're both listed under Genco Coaching upcoming events. Anything you wish to share, Marta?
Right now, no, I'm kind of doing the same thing, and it's interesting because what's really kind of picking up a lot of speed is my website design business. So yeah, I'm headed in that direction, full speed.
Beautiful to hear that. Well,
Mm.
thank you both for being here and helping us facilitate this conversation. And for our audience, you've been listening to Coaching with Mastery and Elegance with Tijen Genco, an original podcast from Genco Coaching, where we discuss coaching mastery concepts, ideas for self-awakening. If you have enjoyed the show, we would be grateful if you leave us a feedback wherever you're tuning into us. And you can also follow us for free in your podcasting app. If you would like more insights, we bring you in this show about improving your coaching or expanding your consciousness, you can find my books on Amazon and subscribe to gencocoaching.com website to be informed about our upcoming events. Thank you for being with us. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Tisha.
Thank you.